So, keeping that in mind, we will delve right in. So federal regulations for distance education. Um, my screen decided to freeze up on me for a moment. Apologies. There have been a lot coming our way recently for distance education, and it's all been concentrated on higher ed, although some of this regulation does impact K-12. Obviously, if you're ETOM, we're concentrated in higher ed. Um, but it seems like higher ed distance education has been under attack. It really has felt that way from my point of view and from others I've talked to. And the Department of Ed has given reasons. They're saying that they want more data from online education. They feel there's not enough data because of how, the idea of distance education being distance, right? They feel it needs more regulation in that way, so they want more data to back up what we are doing. They also are saying that they're protecting students and student interest. There's the mindset that distance education is not equal to our in-person courses and our in-person programs. And so it needs more regulation to protect the students. Now, I just want to say this is what the Department of Ed is saying. That's not what Sarah's saying. I want to clarify that. They also are saying it's protecting the use and distribution of federal financial aid. So that's been a big one in recent years, especially with the idea of loan forgiveness and whatnot. How does that kind of, should there be a differentiation between distance education and in-person programs? So this is the reasons they're giving on why there have been so much focus, I guess you could say, on distance education. So as you probably saw, what came out this summer were a lot of changes proposed, and I want to make sure that you understand that they were proposed. There was opening for public comment, and there were discussions. There were lobbyists trying to speak for NC Sarah and other organizations. So they weren't finalized yet. But basically, what the Department of Education proposed were I've listed five here, and these are kind of like the overarching ones, but there were a lot more sub points to them. So they wanted online learning to take attendance, to track participation. Right now, our courses, we have to like acknowledge that students have participated for financial aid reasons, but they wanted distance ed to take attendance like every week, every day, whatever the kind of situation was. They wanted to expand the eligibility for TRIO programs to non-citizens. If you're unfamiliar with TRIO, TRIO is an opportunity for underprivileged persons to have higher ed education, and so they wanted to expand that to non-citizens as well. And then remove asynchronous options for clock hour programs. That was a big one. Regulations impacting NC Sarah. This was a lot. So this included like NC Sarah's board needed to be changed. If we had more than 500 students from a different state than where our in-person institution resided, then we had to go through that state's approval to teach distance ed as opposed to using the NC Sarah agreement. Um, and we also had to have a location listed for our virtual students. Um, and there was a lot of, I would say it was very unclear on like what that meant, whether we could have one virtual location, did we need a different virtual location for each state, so on and so forth. There was a lot of just up in the air questions around all of these changes. NC Sarah did have a response, so they elected some new members to their board. They did not change their board completely to match what the proposed changes required, but they did elect new members. And they did revise their student complaint policy process and posting, mainly because they wanted to be seen as taking care of the student, right? Which I'm a huge advocate for NC Sarah, not just because it's the same name, but because they're an amazing organization. And so I feel like they do take care of our students, but they were trying to be more upfront and transparent with that. I went to a conference in November, and I sat in with the president of NC Sarah, and she talks about how these changes have impacted them and what they've done. And then we had a change in administration, right? We have a new president coming in, um, and our president that his cabinet that made these changes are going out. So all these proposed changes were then up in the air. Are these actually going to happen? And they came out January 5th. Only one change happened. They only implemented one of these items, and that was that institutions have to report distance education students that are receiving financial aid. That's the only change that actually happened. And for my contacts at NC Sarah, they believe this is because, and I don't want to speak for them. I'm guessing, and I want to be upfront about that. But they believe that this is because um, one, Trump's administration would do away with all the other changes if they did try to implement them. So what would be the point? And this one change they felt like is enough middle ground between the two administrations that they could pass this through. So it has been passed, and I will talk about that on my next slide. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. So what this means is that institutions are required to report which students receive federal financial aid and are enrolled in a distance education or a correspondence program. And instead of reporting them to another organization, which was the original proposed idea, we will report this to the National Student Loan Data System, so NSLD. The implementation date is January 1 or July 1, 2026, but our first reporting is not until 2027. So it's kind of, we don't have to report this information until 2027, but we have to show that we've implemented these changes to track this information by 2026. So we have plenty of time. So again, this excludes a lot of the proposed changes from this past summer, mainly because of the change in administration. And the idea is that this is enough of a middle ground proposal that hopefully this will go through. So it has been officially passed, but whether it is repealed is yet to be seen. So I originally had a lot to talk about, and now there's only one item. So I don't know how long I will be talking. I would encourage you all to share as well. But with this change, what Olivet is considering I mean, we already kind of have the IDs within our tracking program of distance education programs. We already track who gets federal financial aid. So it's really kind of just connecting those dots. Uh, our data analysis person is working on making sure that we have that data and all the kind of labels and points accurate, but it doesn't seem like it will be too much of a additional burden because we do already have the information available to us. Now, I do want to clarify that this is courses, not program. So even if a student is enrolled as a residential student, if they take one online class and receive financial aid for it, you will have to report them. So that's kind of the caveat. That might be the difficult option because they are not necessarily labeled as a distance ed student. Which summer, I feel like for Olivet, that's our summer classes. The majority of our summer classes are online, even for our residential students. So we will have to make sure that we catch that kind of grouping within it. I have more concepts to go over from past changes, but these are the most recent, so I wanted to pause here and see if anybody had any contributions or questions. Again, I'm not the expert, so there may be things that I've missed that you want to share from your institution's perspective. I see something in the chat. Oh, thanks, Gary. Okay. I will continue to move forward, but feel free to post, oh, more in the chat. Awesome. To the attendance taking. So the attendance reporting was not implemented. So that was a proposed item from this past summer that institutions had to take attendance for the distance ed, but that's no longer that's not that's not gone through. So we don't necessarily have to do that anymore. When that was first proposed, though, if you're interested in taking attendance for your institution, we at Olivet did we have like weekly requirements, right, for student participation. And so we viewed it as a weekly attendance taking as opposed to daily or semester wise, that kind of thing. So, and in our system, which is Canvas, our platform is Canvas, we kind of just run a report for targeted classes to see if there are any issues with attendance, our student development team then takes them to see if there's any students that they want to touch base with. But so that would have been our workaround if that actually had been required. We require our professors to take attendance because at the end of the semester, if a student fails or has an incomplete, they are required to post their last day of attendance. And we define attendance for distance ed by some type of interaction within the course that has documentation. So it's not just that they entered the course, but that they did something in the platform that can show they interacted with it. That's how we define it. That attendance element when the DOE proposed it was not very clear. So that was one of the questions people had. Well, how do we measure attendance? What is attendance? So I'd say that's not answered because they didn't follow through with it, but that's how we defined it, all of that. And I do think it's really important to make sure if you are requiring attendance, that you have a definition for what attendance means in distance ed. I think, let me know if you have anything else, Beth. So I'm going to go through other changes that we've seen in the past couple years that we've had to implement all of that. This might be something that you um, are also considering and want to share about. There we go. Um, So there has been implementation of a student location policy. This is mainly affecting online licensure programs. But basically, it's a requirement for institutions to have a written policy and documented process for establishing location of prospective students as well as students that have applied. And this needs to be a consistent process, not something that is dependent on where the student is or what program the student's going into. It needs to be a consistent process across the board. Um, so both the process and the policy that need to be in place should be regular and frequent, and address any updates as needed. So what we did, we added a policy that is public in our academic catalog as well as public on our website. We also included it in our student handbook, but that's not public, that's only for our students. And the policy includes definitions of student location, so what that means, as well as time of enrollment. Because our policy jumps from, okay, prospective student, this is your location versus when you're enrolled, how do we track location? And it's a different process for each, just because once they're enrolled, they're in our system and it's easier to track. So we have a process for recording location as well as frequent check-ins and updates to make sure that location is accurate. And the kind of responsibility in this switched for us, right? The responsibility what had always been on the student to make sure their address and their location that is logged in our system was accurate. And this switched to being more of our responsibility to make sure that we had that location accurate. The reason why is because for licensure programs online, if you have a student in a different state, you have to make sure that the program that you're teaching them meets that state's requirement for that licensure. So for example, we have a social work program that when students complete, they can apply for licensure, they take a test. And we need to make sure that where they're located, where they're going to pursue a career, our program meets those requirements in that state. So if there's any student a prospective student that resides in a state that doesn't, we have to let them know, which is also a federal requirement. And so we have to have this policy to identify where prospective students are. And then if students move partway through the program, we need to make sure that they've moved to a location that we still meet those requirements. So we have to track that kind of update as they're enrolled. So that's where this policy came into place. I don't remember the date of implementation, but this has been implemented. I actually no, I do remember the date. We had to have this posted by July 1, 2024. Oh, Ian's on top of it. There's our policy, Ian. Way to go. Um, can you share your definitions and how you track? I should have had that in front of me. Um, I don't have that in front of me. I'm on my laptop, so I don't have multiple screens to pull it up on. But our student location was their permanent address. I know that that was a component of it. So the student location was part of their permanent address, not where they were residing or moved. It was where their permanent address was located. And then time of enrollment had to do with not necessarily when they register for classes, but when they, um, I think it was a joint combination of agreed payment as well as our online student orientation enrollment. I think that was the part because that's they're enrolled in that before their classes at Olivet. But I can share those once I um, am back on a normal computer. I can share that information with Gary and he can share it out with this recording. Anything else about student location that anybody wants to share? Does anybody else have they addressed this in a different way? Want to share their policy? Yeah, so that's always the problem, right? If a student moves and doesn't report it to us, that's why we've kind of taken on that more of a responsibility for check-ins. So through our process, we have a adult student success navigator is what we're calling her, and it's a new position at Olivet. And this person checks in with a student regularly. Olivet, we're very focused on relationship-based learning, so she's kind of a component of that. But with that, she will also kind of regulate enrollments. In terms of our policy, it's that students have to report it, right? But we've also taken on that responsibility from our end and making sure that we have that accurate information because we don't want to get into a situation where a student has moved, spent all this money on this licensure program, taken the exam, and then can't get their license where they're located because that could cause a lot of problems for us if they come back, but it also causes a lot of problems for our students, and we don't want them to be at a disadvantage. Okay. So the next item that occurred July 1, 2024 was the PPA certification. So this institutions may only enroll distance education students in licensure programs that meet states and territories. So previously, if you had a licensure program like social work, you could admit students from any state that you qualified for, whether under NC-SARA or a different kind of agreement. Uh, you just had to inform them. We don't meet requirements in this state, but you could still enroll them. You could still have them complete your program. You just had to make sure they knew that your program does not meet the qualifications for them to practice in that state once they get their license. Now that is no longer the case. You can no longer enroll distance education students in a licensure program unless you meet that state's requirements. And as you recall, there are three definitions when you are determining whether your program meets a state. It's meets, does not, and unsure, unknown. Um, One of the proposed changes that they put forward this past summer was that you could no longer have the middle ground of unsure. That did not pass, so that one we no longer have to worry about. But this is still in place. We still have to meet a state's requirements in order to enroll a student. So what we did, we basically just changed our marketing logarithms in terms of where we market. We're not going to market in states that we don't meet because we can't take those students. And we also have like a student, when they apply, they include their information and their location. So we just have kind of like a ping that says we can't accept this student. We can engage with them and see if they want to kind of pursue a different degree that we offer that we can, or if they have considerations of moving in the future, all that stuff. But we cannot accept them while their location is in that state. And we have basically have draft letters for prospective students as well as enrolled students, because this also impacts enrolled students. So we have draft letters that are automatically sent out to any prospective students in a state that does not meet that we do not meet the requirements, as well as enrolled students if they move to a state. And I don't know if we use Slate for that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that platform, but that's what we use for that. I think those were it. So I just have discussion now. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because I don't think we need the word discussion to discuss. Um, And I'd love to hear what other people are doing. If you have any questions, anything else you want me to share, um, or go over. Oh, that's a good point, Sonia. Yeah, so the modality does not necessarily matter. The program can be on ground. If it does not meet the requirements, you cannot enroll them. Um, And NC Sarah, yeah, NC Sarah has some really good resources about licensure programs. And one resource that we have found very helpful at Olivet in terms of determining that meets, because that can be quite the process. Um, I mean, you have to go through every state for every licensure program. It's not if we meet Ohio for social work, that doesn't necessarily mean we meet for nursing or for counseling. Like we have several licensure programs at Olivet. And that's a lot of work, mainly on the program director, because they know their program and they know the field, whereas I keep track of the licensure documents, but I don't know. And if you haven't heard of them before, help is a great resource for that. They have the bookmark is what it's called. Let me see if I can pull up their website and give you a link. But they are incredibly like they track all this and they keep up to date on changes in all these different fields. Um, so if Ohio changes their, oh, thank you, Ian. If Ohio changes their requirements, they let you know. We find them incredibly valuable. It saves a lot of time. It's still a check-in with the program director. Like I still have to reach out to our director of social work. Does this change in Massachusetts affect us? Because again, I don't know the field. I can try and determine it, but I don't want to make a mistake. Um, so they are very helpful. And they're actually the state authorization network, they're actually affiliated with WICHE. So they're I can't speak more highly of help. They're helpful.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to stop.